I'm going to get a bit more specific now, taking on Nigel's examples about why an institution like UAL and CSM should even have the bravery to say that we are part of or can contribute to the business world. Last year, the college ran a series of events called What's the Point of Art School, which was a dumb question, knowingly dumb, and came up with lots of answers. But the main answer, or one of the main answers that we came up with, was that art schools need, and design schools, need to turn outwards from their quite internalised discourse and to begin to look outwards and to address societal issues and to contribute to the discussion around societal issues. So this year we introduced a new set of, a new project called Restless Futures, which is going to go on for 2 years. And Restless Futures is based on 3 premises. They're kind of truisms. Well, actually, no, they're not truisms because you're going to debate the second one. The first is that we live in a time of unprecedented change, that we live in a time of restless futures in which the standard ways of thinking and doing are being severely challenged. There's this quote from Zygmunt Bauman who talks about the age of liquid modernity that we live in. And it's a quite scary quote to do with everything that we know has been liquefied. The second premise is that the ways of thinking that have been evolved, particularly since the Enlightenment, are not capable of dealing with these restless futures. And in particular, in relation to today, and this is a provocation, that some of the ways of thinking that are developed within the standard business school model aren't capable of dealing with these changes. And you can look at a lot of examples in recent past and as we go forward as to why that may be happening. And the third premise is that potentially the thinking of art schools and design schools, and I apologise to Clive in advance for this, is that could be a way in which we can address these restless futures. As an example of just the idiocy that we're in, I want to just look at the New York Stock Exchange. The New York Stock Exchange moved its main server out to New Jersey, where all the electronic interchanges take place. Around the edge of the server, they started selling the most expensive real estate in the world so that the equity houses could have their servers to be connected directly into the central server. Those very quickly filled up. So they built another layer around the edge in which another set of equity dealers built their servers. However, the people on the outside got fed up with the people on the inside because the length of their cable was longer, and therefore in the micro seconds in which dealing is now done, they were at a disadvantage. So what they negotiated, the New York Stock Exchange, was that these people would have their stuff as a thing like that, so it's an equal length. At that stage, these people complained because it took longer to go round a curved thing than a straight thing. And so the New York Stock Exchange agreed that what should happen was they should have equal curves. Now that little example seems to me to be a good parable almost of the state that we're in, because there's nothing less than a nanosecond. So that if 70% of all trading is now done in this fast nanosecond trading, it suggests that we're running out of any surplus value to exploit. We are in an endgame. And in that endgame, we need new tools and new ways of thinking to re-equip ourselves for a new future in which that kind of idiocy is not happening. So one of the things that we are doing and we are launching at CSM is an MBA, which people may find as a presumption for an art school to launch an MBA. But we're doing it as not a provocation, but as a real sense that, as Nigel was suggesting, that an institution like UAL and CSM has something to offer in terms of ways of thinking which can contribute to a wider debate than nanosecond training as an example of the potential end for capitalism. We are looking, therefore, and we will be emailing you, I'm afraid, because we've also got, we're sort of co-designing it in public. And it'd be very grateful if particularly the business people in the audience could sort of contribute to say, well, is this a presumption or is this actually a good way forward? So what I want to do very quickly then now is to say, well, having set a kind of high stool for myself to fall off as head of Simpson Martin and say, well, you know, we have these ways of thinking, is just very quickly to suggest some of the things, and this is very personal. I'm nervous because some of my colleagues in here, and so representing my colleagues is notoriously difficult. So this is me, not Simpson Martins, which is what I'm identifying as trends which I see emerging in some of the work which our students are producing. And the first is a shift which I think is happening not just at St Martin's but across the university and in many art schools, which is away from the traditional vision of the art school as this place of contemplation of the muse coming in from above with light, and suddenly the muse strikes and you polish this beautiful artifact over a period of time in a place of contemplation. And the artifact is the thing which is privileged. The product of the painting, the product of the sculpture, the product of the craft is all the privileged thing. Now, I'm not saying that you throw away the product, but what is becoming apparent is an interest in what happens before and after the product, i.e. the process, the context in which the product is formed, the social, environmental, economic and environmental context, but equally what happens after the product, i.e. the consequences. So in my own work I write about the consequences of architecture rather than the object of architecture. And we see this very much in the work of our students, that they don't just say, oh, I'm going to create a beautiful thing. They say, what is the context in which this thing is first going to be situated in, and then that is their context for design. And I think that also has a relevance to the way that art and design can contribute, therefore, to the processes and the social and economic processes which are evolving. Because the second thing, which I think is probably more important, is a shift from the idea that what a student or an artist or designer does is to solve problems, to seeing themselves as creating opportunities. There's a very nice quote which I read out from an architectural critic called Rainer Banham, who says, "A professional is a man with an interest and a continuing interest in the existence of problems. Professionals set problems in order that they can solve them." And the classic problem-solving mechanism is the case method of the business school, which starts in the very first line with the setting of a problem. In this case, professionals interested in the problem are the professionals of the Harvard Business School, who on their website claim that they set 80% of all case studies, which are then distributed around international business schools. That's probably not true, but that kind of sense that what you do is to solve problems is, I would say, a rather miserablest approach. In as much as problems, not only because it's a miserable word, but all you can do in solving a problem is to slightly shift the status quo. You can only make the world a bit better. You're not going to radically shift it. Our students aren't interested in problems because they're boring. And in a way, they're miserable. It's much more fun to find opportunities. And that seems to me a very simple and straightforward shift of attitude, in which if I said to one of our students, oh, go and solve this problem, they'd probably just say, oh, what if, and walk off and do something else. And I think that sense of the shift from the problem to the opportunity is something also that we will be, we're talking about as embedding within the new MBA. The next one is, again, I don't think it's a CSM training this particularly, but is more about, these are very simple, so I'm doing 4, complex thing about art schools, is to do with a shift from the linear method of reason, and reason being, ever since Enlightenment, the privileged mode of thought, which exceeds and dominates issues of irrationality or issues of accident. But the trouble with the linear thing is it's almost a spatial thing, that you can just see one way of seeing the world. What happens if you go around the edge and see the world from the side? And that's effectively what our students do. The root of the linear suggests that there is only one solution, and that the reason will allow you to reach the better solution the more reasoned and linear you are. Whereas coming around the edge, you accept that actually the final end game is never fixed. And particularly in our times of restlessness, our times of liquid modernity, we can't assume that there is a single point of truth. Therefore, looking from the side is much more interesting than looking straight down the canyon. And the final one, which is probably the most provocative, potentially, within an audience which is asking questions about the intersection of arts and business, is a shift which I think is really apparent within our student work, from an emphasis on economic value, i.e., can I sell this product, into an emphasis on social value. And I think in a way it's almost inevitable this is happening. They're living in a city which is an economic catastrophe to live in. They're living in a time when their own economic stability is so far ahead they can't even think about how they're going to achieve it. And they're living in a time when economic orthodoxies have proved so catastrophically wanting. Look at 2008 and look at the austerity regimes that come out of it, that they feel that they have to imagine a future which takes the set economic paradigms and reframes them. And they reframe them through notions of social value rather than economic value. And within emerging forms of imagining futures, the idea of social value, probably in alliance with economic value, is surely going to become more important. So if those are some of the, that's 4, and these are mine, and I guess I get beaten up afterwards by my colleagues, is some of the things that I see emerging. As ways of thinking and ways of doing. The Restless Futures programme that we've instigated came out of a set of academic forums in which we asked staff and students what they felt were the key issues emerging, which, if we are going to be looking outwards, that we as a college should be addressing. So these 4 things come, as it were, from the bottom. The first one is interesting in the context of this, which is about innovation. Innovation, I'm sure, will be talked about much more authoritatively later, but one of the issues is maybe that innovation becomes professionalized. It becomes the realm of the expert. You go and learn how to innovate, which we do to some extent through our courses, but what is also maybe interesting is what happens if you make innovation not part of the realm of the expert, but part of an emerging democratic field. If you make innovation available through open source, through participatory techniques, through community engagement, etc., etc. How do you as a designer enable the democratization of innovation? The second theme is one of disruptive futures and disruptive technologies. And disruptive technologies are often used as a method of claiming the market, and that will keep on going. It's happening at the moment over in California. People are probably watching, oh my God, what's happening with the iPhone? Is it going to disrupt my life, the iPhone 6? And I'm going to buy one next week, by the way. But what happens if, as a designer, instead of using disruptive technology as a method of claiming the market, you use it in a more empowering method, a more constructive method? And also, what are the effects of disruptive futures, disruptive technologies, on one's own practice? The third theme is no more stuff. What happens in a post-growth society? What happens as a designer, where a designer is often almost identified with the production of the new? And it is the normal way by which designers situate themselves is through the production of the new. What happens if adding more stuff to the world is no longer either viable, acceptable, sustainable, or something which is going to continue into the future? What happens if you ask the question, that question, and where does the designers situate themselves within a post-growth society? This is a project which is done in St Martin's, which is going to be part of an exhibition. And the final one is what Nigel was talking about, which is how within these restless futures the boundaries break down between disciplines, very productively, we all think. And the artist can engage with the scientist, but then what does that mean for the act of design or the act of art, the practice of those two things? How do you hold on to what is particular to you, but at the same time engage what might be particular to others? And so the notion of expanded boundaries, I think, would be talked about quite a lot today. So in the sense of us saying, well, this is what an arts and design school can do within business, what I've very briefly tried to do is to set out some of the ways that not I and the deans are directing, but seem to be emerging as a debate within St Martin's. Because if we have reached potentially an end game, I'm not sure that's true, because I think in conversations like this, we might actually think we're somewhere at a starting line, but to do that, we have to think quite radically different. Thank you very much.